Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of the Contrarian. Delighted to welcome back Brian Klaas. He is the author of one of my favorite books, Fluke, and he talks about how the unexpected, the incidental, the seemingly random events change history and change our lives. Welcome, Brian. So nice to see you.
It's so good to be back. Thanks for having me on the show.
It seems that we have had a series of natural disasters around the world, unfortunately, the most recent in Burma, but also in Bosnia, that have triggered enormous political reactions. Talk to us a little bit about that in the context of your thesis, which are these small, unexpected, unplanned events have ginormous consequences.
Yeah, so the one that comes to mind is I was in Thailand a couple weeks ago, and they had the Boxing Day tsunami, just over 20 years ago. It was just over 20 years in December, and an astonishing number of people died. Almost 255,000 people were killed in this natural disaster. And when I was there and I was going to the Tsunami Museum, I was really struck by the fact that no one had thought to pay for tsunami detection in the Indian Ocean, right? There was no early warning system in place because it was rare, it did not normally happen, and they thought it was a waste of money. And so this got my brain going because at the exact moment I was there, DOGE was busy cutting literally the tsunami prevention budget for the United States. And they fired one of the chief tsunami scientists in the Pacific that is supposed to monitor these things for the United States and the rest of the world. And so I viewed this as sort of this warning parable, right? That all the stuff that you have in terms of government investment, which one person like Elon Musk sees as waste, is actually prevention that stops disasters from occurring or having massive, massive consequences politically. And, you know, when I was looking at this, it's not that you can stop these things from happening, right? There are going to be earthquakes and tsunamis. It's about mitigating the harm to people. And when I was doing the research for this sort of idea, I was looking at the very stupid ways in which government has been cut in right before disaster has struck. And my favorite example of this is from 2019. The Trump administration closed the coronavirus tracking capability the United States had because they thought it would save $200 million. And, literally 3 months later, COVID emerges in China, and the government of the United States spends $4.6 trillion on its response, which is 23,000 times more than the monitoring capability. And so, I'm just struck by how much the short-sightedness of cost saving is going to create long-term, way higher costs for the United States and the world.
Right. One of the things that they always talk about when they're cutting government is there's so much duplication. Talk to us a little bit about duplication and why it's important to have duplication in some instances because of these events that come along, maybe not so frequently, but have devastating impact.
Yeah, so one of the big themes in my research is the jargony way of saying is the optimization resilience trade-off. But basically, what it actually means is that if you optimize a system to be perfectly fitted to the moment, when the situation changes, it's actually not resilient because it's only capable of surviving in one environment. And we have so many examples of this in the natural world, right? Like DNA has massive amounts of junk DNA so that when the environment changes, the species can adapt. And there's ways for things to shift and change over time. And what I'm really worried about is that this excessive optimization and the sort of idea that you shouldn't have any redundancy in the system means that as the world changes slightly, everything breaks, right? And Elon Musk is applying the sort of Twitter model where he cut all of this what he saw as waste, and of course there were outages in Twitter and things broke and so on. But when Twitter breaks, it's like a meme doesn't get posted. When the U.S. government breaks, lots of people die.
Right.
And I think that's sort of where we're headed, is we're headed towards a world where there's absolutely no resilience. And this piece I wrote in the Atlantic recently, I had a metaphor where I said it's like, a person climbing up a mountain and they've got their climbing rope, and Elon Musk comes along and says, it'll actually be cheaper if you use this string. And they say, okay, good idea. And of course, the only moment that they realize that they should not have done that is when they fall. And until
Right.
then, it looks exactly the same. And I think that's basically the parable of what government is like, is that nobody notices the low-cost string until the catastrophe strikes. And then you
Wow.
really wish you had the climbing rope. And I think that's what the US government is going to experience the hard way, unfortunately, with a lot of people suffering as a result.
Right. You've also written a lot about research, what gets researched, who does the research. We are now in the process of slashing NIH, other kind of grants to universities that do some scientific research that may not have immediate application, but are crucial. Talk to us a little bit about how the research industry, if you will, works and what happens when you have this giant interruption and stuff gets cut off in the short term.
Yeah, so one of the big myths that people believe about research is that it always has a specific purpose from the outset. Most of the big discoveries have not been obviously foreshadowed by the researcher. And some good examples is that one of the most obvious recent one is the mRNA technology that was used for vaccines, where basically the inventor of this was almost a pariah academic because there was no seeming purpose for this until COVID struck, and then it became the most important technology in the world. But all sorts of other stuff. Microwaves were invented by accident when someone who was using the technology that was supposed to be for military purposes realized that a candy bar in his pocket was melting. And there's things like this all the time where you have these accidental innovations. So when you cut budgets and you say that unless there is an obvious immediate purpose that Elon Musk deems worth money, right? What you're actually doing is you're curbing innovation. And in the short run, you won't notice that. That's the other thing that's the problem of this is a lot of this stuff has long effects. So, we wouldn't have known about the mRNA, vaccine technology if we had cut it in 1990. No one would have been the wiser. It would have been fine,
Right.
right? And then when it emerges that it's actually very useful, you're very grateful you have it. That's how research works. And I think this is the sort of short-term payoff culture that we have. It's like if you
Right.
can't prove that something is worth spending money on right now, we might as well cut it. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how innovation works in modern society.
Right. One of the things you also talk about are the inevitable forks in the road, forks and forks and forks that lead down the road. Some events have very predictable immediate consequences. We declare a trade war and China retaliates, but it can also change individual people's lives, individual political decisions. So part of what happens is the road not taken, the prosperity not pursued. Talk to us a little bit about how that works and how we can't even, in some sense, know the damage is being done because it's the lost opportunity.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a huge amount of sort of invisible aspects that change whenever you have a major policy shift. So the trade war, lots of pundits will accurately forecast the fact that this will probably be good for China in the long run because, China will look like the stable grown up in the room and so on. They'll peel off trade partners that are now hit by the tariffs and so on. Even though they might have some short-term, costs associated with the trade war. And so there's other stuff, destabilization, loss of growth, all those sorts of things. Those are all foreseeable. I think the thing that we don't foresee is the companies that just get a bit hesitant, right? They're not maybe immediate victims of the trade war, but they say, you know what, this volatility is not something I want to dabble in. So they decide to, invest somewhere else instead of the United States. The researchers who leave because of the hostility, not because they're fired, but because they just don't want to end up going there. And I'm seeing little echoes of this in my own career as an academic in the UK, where I have, my top students who normally would be applying for Harvard and Princeton and Stanford, applying to universities in Europe and Britain and so on instead, precisely because they're worried about being targeted on visas or having, just really dystopian experiences in the United States under Trump. And if that's true for the students, right, it's also true for business. It's also true for those who would hold conferences or vacation in the United States. And so I think, there's sort of these reorientations that are happening where people are just starting to look at the US as an unreliable place and they have alternatives. I mean, that's the way the Trump administration is behaving is that no one can ever have an alternative to the United States.
Right.
They
Right.
exist, and there's a lot of places that are going to swoop in and try to capture the loss. So I think in terms of the road not taken, this aspect here is going to be all the invisible costs that are not from supply chains, but are from just a loss of global reputation that
Got it.
comes out of the trade war.
Got it. Fascinating. As we reach the end of our time, let me ask you about the role of abject stupidity and errors. So, the National Security Advisor, because of, I think, autofill, types in a name. Jeffrey Goldberg pops into a conversation. He was not sucked into a conversation, he was invited in. Talk to us a little bit about kind of random stupidity, and is there anything we can do to prevent it, other than using secure chains of communication, obviously, and how those events historically, globally, can have enormous impact well beyond what we ever imagined.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff where I look at the past 10 years of American politics, and I've just, if you were to add up all of the mental energy that people have tried to explain away stupidity, right? Where it's like the most obvious explanation is these people are not very bright, they're in over their heads, and they're extremely overconfident, which compounds the problem. And instead, you come up with this sort of 3D chess explanation. Oh, this is a gambit. It's masterful gambit, sir, that you've, brought this journalist into our secret illegal conversation about national
Yeah.
security. I mean, that was one of the benefits of that conversation, to my mind, happening in such an obviously stupid way, is that nobody could claim that this was just a ploy to, like, have some genius moment where the Atlantic was, involved in this national security leak. The myth, and this is something that I've tried to explain to lots of people in my work in authoritarianism. The myth is that for dictators or authoritarians to be successful, they have to be geniuses. A lot of the people who are authoritarians are eccentric idiots. And it's not that they're less scary because of that, right? And it's that you realize that it is very simple to break things and very, very hard to solve things. And so, people who are stupid can destroy democracy. And in fact, they often are more effective because people don't see them as calculating, ruthless, evil people sometimes. And some of Trump's supporters, right, they clearly do not see him as a malicious actor in a way where the sort of more savvy dictators are viewed with suspicion precisely because they look clever, right? And so, I think when you look at lots of historical moments, I mean, one of my favorites, by the way, it's an obscure one that a lot of people have never heard of, but you were talking about Burma and Myanmar's earthquake. There was a dictator named Ne Win who had a superstition that the number 9 was auspicious in every way. And so he eliminated the existing currency and replaced it with denominations of nines. So instead of 100, you have 9 and 18 and so on. And he wiped out his entire national currency in a day. I mean, it crashed the economy. It was disastrous, but it was just very stupid. And at some point, you sort of think, okay, you can break things. If you want to fix the Myanmar economy, it takes a lot of intelligence. And I think that's the lesson of the Trump years, is that you can be highly consequential and highly effective through stupidity and maliciousness, right? But that undoing the damage is going to take a lot of concerted effort. And this is where I sort of think we have a generational problem. It's going to be a generation to repair the damage of Trump, unfortunately.
Well, Brian, it is always fascinating talking to you, and it helps, if not make things better, at least put things in some kind of perspective so that we know what is happening to us. So continued good luck in all of your research and work, and I am sure we will have you back because you are one of the few people who really helps make sense of the stupidity and the chaos. So thank you for enlightening us. We'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thanks so much.